those individuals will not be able to sell or transfer that property. In the Heller case, the Supreme Court made clear that the Second Amendment protects firearms in common use at the time. During the markup, Representative Bishop asked the chairman, quote, is it the point of the bill to ban weapons that are in common use in the United States today? And the chairman said, the problem is that they are in common use. Yes, so this is the goal, and this is why it's unconstitutional. It couldn't be any clearer. Democrats don't care what the Constitution says. Fortunately, courts are correctly applying the Constitution. Last week, a federal district court judge in Colorado, who was appointed by President Obama, issued a temporary restraining order against the town of Superior, Colorado, to prevent it from implementing an assault weapon ban. The judge wrote, plaintiffs have stated that semi-automatic weapons, as well as magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, are commonly used by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes, and therefore cannot be banned. And guess what this bill will do? It won't make communities safer. Won't make them safer at all. In fact, in the Heller case, the Supreme Court said, Second Amendment protects firearms in common use at the time, and also said this, quote, for lawful purposes like self-defense. 3 weeks ago, July 7th, 2022, a Florida homeowner used his AR-style rifle when individuals forcibly entered his home. After the homeowner opened fire, the individuals immediately fled. When asked if the homeowner would face charges, the Escambia County Sheriff Chip Simmons said, quote, absolutely not. The homeowner is protecting himself, and in Florida, you can do that. You can protect yourself. Democrats tried this ban before. It didn't work. It won't work now. And you know what it will do? It'll make communities, I think, less safe. What will make communities safer, though, is if Democrats stop defunding the police, stop cashless bail, start prosecuting criminals. They're taking away firearms used for self-defense by law-abiding Americans. This bill is wrong. It will make communities, I think, less safe, and it's unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Speaker of the House, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Pelosi.
The gentlelady from California, Ms. Pelosi, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his great leadership. Mr. Speaker, each year, more children die from gun violence than any other cause. Cancer, auto accidents, any other cause. Our nation has watched in unspeakable horror as assault weapons have been used in massacre after massacre in communities across the country. And disturbingly, so many of these mass shootings have targeted our precious children in their schools, at the movies, at the malls, and throughout our communities. That is why I rise today in strong support in reinstating the assault weapons ban, a long overdue step to get deadly weapons off our streets. Make no mistake, we know that an assault weapon ban can work because it has worked before. For 10 years, from 1994 to 2004, our families were protected by a strong assault weapon ban, strongly championed in the Senate by then Senator, now President, Joe Biden. Chuck Schumer led the way over here, Dianne Feinstein in the Senate. I was a relatively new member of Congress who was whipping for this legislation. It made us all very, very proud. More importantly, it saved many lives. During that time, we witnessed gun crime with assault weapons drop by up to 40%. Let me repeat, gun violence by assault weapons reduced by 40%. Meanwhile, since the ban expired, the number of mass shooting deaths has grown by nearly 500%. And it is particularly sickening to now see these same deadly weapons, are you ready for this, being marketed to children. Here's an advertisement for a JR-15 designed to be a so-called smaller, safer, lighter version of the horrific AR-15, which has been used to murder so many of their playmates and friends. Look at this, these little skulls with ponytails and that. The manufacturer stated that their goal was to develop a shooting platform that was not only sized correctly, but also looks, feels, and operates just like mom and dad's gun. Mom and dad's gun, they use that expression. Indeed, gunmaker We1 Tactical launched the Junior 15 and said, quote, "We are excited to start capturing the imagination of the next generation." Indeed, this callousness is disgusting. It's despicable, and it reminds us that the crisis of gun violence requires action. To the families who are survivors and have suffered from gun violence, we have said over and over again, we will not stop until the job is done. We thank them for turning their sorrow to help others, prevent others from suffering in that way. They've turned their agony into action. Now, whether we're saying we're going from Newtown to Uvalde, everything in between, and since, there's so many deaths, so much sorrow, so much hope that we would get the job done. They are so responsible for our bringing this legislation to the floor. Their outside mobilization, their advocacy with great intellectual integrity has made all the difference. Today, House Democrats will vote to reinstate the assault weapons ban with strong protections for children and families. The bill prohibits the sale, manufacture, transfer, or possession of semi-automatic assault weapons, as well as high-capacity magazines. And contrary to what the gentleman on the other side of the aisle said, it requires safe storage for lawfully owned assault weapons already in our communities. It's not about taking guns away from people who should have them. It's about safe storage. You have a problem with that? And it strongly supports our law enforcement heroes who should not have to confront weapons designed for the battlefield, instead in our communities. To be clear, this is a very special day in the Congress of the United States that history will record as one designed to save lives. For his passionate, persistent leadership on this legislation, let me salute Congressman David Cicilline, I don't know if he's on the floor, who has been fighting ferociously on this issue for years and years. To Lucy McBath, who has been, again, a member of the Committee of Jurisdiction, an intellectual resource, a strategic thinker, and inspiration to all of us who turned her personal grief into action and makes a difference. And thank you, Chairman Jerry Nadler, Chair of the Judiciary Committee, for steering this legislation through the Judiciary Committee and to the floor. And also, I want to recognize once again, President Joe Biden's longtime leadership on this issue and the beautiful words he expressed about this when we were celebrating the bipartisan safety bill recently. Mr. Speaker, all those who have had the privilege of serving in this hallowed halls take a solemn oath to the American people. At the heart of our oath is our duty to protect and defend. To protect and defend the Constitution, the American people. With this legislation, we honor this foremost responsibility. And when the House returns in August, we will bring to the floor a robust public safety package beyond this. Let me be clear. House Democrats are for people over politics. And say to our friends in this body and down the hall and wherever they are, your political survival is insignificant compared to the survival of children who are at the mercy of these guns. We believe that every American deserves to live in a safe community where they and their families can thrive. That's why Democrats are funding our police while making reforms for better law enforcement training and accountability as we give them the tools, the police the tools they need to prevent crime. We are so proud of the work done by CBC Chair Joyce Beatty, working with Representatives Josh Gottheimer and Abigail Spanberger to make historic legislation that has prioritizing meeting the needs of our law enforcement officers while at the same time having accountability. That is historic. We haven't passed that before. And I'm more confident than ever that we will pass a package rooted in two of the Democrats' most cherished values: justice and safety. I urge my colleagues to support the assault weapons ban, recognizing again that the survival of our children is more important than the political survival of any of us. And with that, I urge a strong and hopefully bipartisan vote to put people over politics by reinstating the assault weapon ban, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 1808, the assault weapons ban of 2022. Here they go again. Once again, my colleagues across the aisle have rushed to exploit your fear and the pain of victims to rush out a gun control measure that will do nothing to save lives or address the root causes of violence. I say exploit your fear, and I point to the Speaker of the House just stood in this well with a poster that had a toy gun on it and wants you to feel scared about that. Well, I have a 6-year-old son, and he has toy guns. And he knows about muzzle discipline. He knows you don't put your finger on the trigger. He knows you don't point it at people. I'm able to teach my son gun safety and make him safer. You don't live through fear. This and other gun control measures like red flag laws, they make the other side feel better. But today's bill will do nothing but disarm law-abiding citizens. Congress has tried this before. 1994, a 10-year assault weapons ban was first enacted. This ban did not stop violent crime or prevent heart-wrenching tragedies like Columbine. Yes, Columbine happened while we had an assault weapons ban. In fact, after the ban ended, the Department of Justice issued a report that concluded, should it be renewed, the ban's effects on gun violence are likely to be small at best, and perhaps too small for reliable measurement. Assault weapons were rarely used in gun crimes even before the ban. That's the Department of Justice. The results are in, folks. A so-called assault weapons ban does not work. But what it does is it takes away your rights and it leaves you vulnerable. Simple truth is criminals don't follow the law. If they did, think about this. If criminals followed the law, we wouldn't have any crime. But when you criminalize guns, only criminals are going to have guns. And so I urge you to vote no on this legislation, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 4 minutes to the sponsor of the bill, a member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
Mr. Cicilline is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 1808, the assault weapons ban, legislation that will help reduce the gun massacres being committed in our communities by weapons of war. These military-style weapons were designed for the battlefield, for maximum efficiency when a soldier is engaged in combat. And the military features banned by this bill are added to make these guns more accurate, more controllable, more concealable, and more deadly, enabling killers to murder as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. These weapons have no place in our communities. They turn our streets, our schools, our grocery stores, our movie theaters, and hospitals into bloody battlefield scenes. And they kill our children, our friends, and neighbors. and the police officers trying to protect them. In 2016 and 2017 alone, more than 24 officers were slain in the line of duty by an assault weapon. 1 in 5 officers is killed in the line of duty by these weapons, which is why the Major City Police Chiefs Association endorses this legislation. Yet for nearly 18 years, we failed to take action to stop them from flooding into our communities and being used time and time and time again in mass shootings. It's unconscionable that anyone can walk into a store and legally purchase a weapon capable of inflicting the carnage we've seen in Highland Park, in Buffalo, in Uvalde, in Atlanta, in Sutherland Springs, Las Vegas, Orlando, Parkland, and the list goes on and on. Today, the House is finally taking a long overdue and necessary step to reinstitute a ban on these exceptionally dangerous weapons. We didn't just come up with this proposal out of thin air and propose it. The original assault weapons ban was in place from 1994 to 2004, and we have clear evidence that it was effective in reducing these killings. Compared with the decade before its adoption, the 1994 assault weapons ban was associated with a 25% drop in gun massacres and a 40% drop in fatalities. And as soon as the ban expired, fatalities and shootings skyrocketed again. And when an assault weapon is used during a mass shooting, 6 times as many people are shot. So today I'm imploring my colleagues to take action to get these weapons of war designed for maximum destruction of human life off our streets. Let me be clear. I respect the Second Amendment, but it's not without limits. Imagine if we clung to the desire to protect our children and our communities as tightly as some of my colleagues cling to their rifles. There are more guns than people in this country, more mass shootings than days in the year. This is a uniquely American problem. This bill won't stop all gun violence, but it will effectively decrease it. Because they were designed for military combat, these weapons don't just kill, they decimate. The shots fired can tear a softball-sized wound into a victim. And we know how we can reduce the suffering. Researchers estimate that if we still had a federal assault weapons ban, we would see a 70% decline in mass shooting deaths. Let that sink in. If the ban had remained in effect, 70% of the families torn apart by these massacres would still have their loved ones. We can't bring back 70% of these victims to their families and friends, but we can work to prevent more carnage moving forward. Let me end by saying this. In my faith tradition, we are taught that whoever destroys a soul, it is considered as if they destroyed an entire world. And whoever saves a life, it is considered as if they saved an entire world. Let's come together to save lives. Pass this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Sheriff Rutherford.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, America doesn't have a gun violence problem. We have a human violence problem. But those across the aisle don't want to talk about that, because then you have to talk about the culture of death that we have created in this country, killing 63 million unborn children, denying the sanctity of life. That's the conversation that they don't want to have. Mr. Speaker, as a former police officer, I've encountered many dangerous people with guns, and we stopped them before they hurt themselves or others. We identified them. We identified the threats that they were making, and then we were able to intervene and stop those individuals before they became a shooter. That is what we should be focused on. In the wake of these recent tragedies, give law enforcement the tools and resources to stop those who have shown a propensity to become violent. That's what we should be focusing on, not defunding the police, not demoralizing the police, not delegitimizing the police. We should be focused on assisting the police in identifying these individuals who want to commit crime. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a member of the committee, the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, America doesn't have to be the only country where mass shootings occur sometimes daily. You know, sometimes I hear people say, well, it's a mental health problem. I'll tell you what, people have mental health problems in countries all over the world, but only one country has mass shootings the way America does. And we need to have a national answer to this. The killer that killed my constituents at the Gilroy Garlic Festival couldn't buy the assault weapon in California, so he just went over to Nevada and bought it there. We need a national answer. We know it works. When the last ban expired, the number of mass shooting deaths increased by 483%. You know, Americans deserve to be safe and to be free of fear that when their kids go to school, they'll be obliterated. You know, we need to put the American people ahead of politics. We need to put American children ahead of politics. We need to vote yes. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Is that 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, we do have a culture of human violence. Recently, a 16-year-old young man with 3 felony arrests in the past 4 months violently attacked and attempted to choke a New York subway police officer. He was released without bail. And that is what's happening where you have the left in charge of criminal justice systems. And why do I bring that up? Because that individual punched that police officer more than 20 times in his attempts to basically kill that officer. And personal weapons such as hands, fists, or feet account for 600 homicides in 2019, according to official reports. And 1,476 murders were committed with knives or cutting instruments, and 364 homicides were committed with rifles. You see the distinction here? But where the Democrats are going for, they want to take away someone's constitutional right instead of enforcing the law for people who are violently and criminal violent. They're going to release those people back into your streets. The Supreme Court has held the Second Amendment protects arms in common use. But at markup, Chairman Nadler admitted that the purpose of the bill is to ban firearms that are in common use. Think about that. That does violence to the Constitution. They simply want to ban guns, and this is just another step along that path. At markup, it became very clear that Democrats don't even understand the guns that they are trying to ban. But they don't care, because when they say they want to put politics above people, or that we shouldn't, what they really mean is they're going to. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to a member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Ms. Jackson Lee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Speaker, I think that we will spend most of our time here today where facts will be told and then rhetorical conversation will be told as well. Fact, the Constitution in the Second Amendment does not prohibit the ban on assault weapons. Fact, 1808, led by Mr. Cicilline, allows gun owners to hold their guns. This deals with the transfer of guns. Fact, as we can see, the lives of our children are lost through carnage, bloodshed, and murder. Fact, by the hands of an AR-15, an assault-style weapon. Our fellow citizens, fact, are killed by an AR-15, 14, an assault-style weapon. Fact, that every weapon of mass carnage is not done by a knife, a BB gun. It is not done by throwing a water bomb or words. It is not done by taking a bus and running over citizens. It is done by assault-style weapons. So I rise today to support H.R. 1808 because I am tired of a fact of doing nothing. Mayor Bowser has a right to complain about Governor Abbott generating individuals unfairly, unjustly, and wrongly to another jurisdiction. but fact is that these weapons have killed. And so without any concern, we are now offering facts. And anyone that suggests that we are taking guns from good
Gentlelady's time
gun
has
owners,
expired.
we are not. Ask unanimous consent to put in the record several articles dealing with the Washington Post, the CBS News, and KXAN. Ask unanimous consent. Vote for H.R. 1808.
Without objection, gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, here's the fact. This bill is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court made clear the Second Amendment protects firearms in common use. This bill has 8 pages of weapons, firearms that it bans, including 24 million firearms that American citizens, law-abiding American citizens, possess today. That is the fact. I yield 2 minutes to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Gomert.
Mr. Gomert is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my friend from Ohio. The previous assault weapons ban that was referenced by our speaker, I just want to make sure the record is actually correct. The FBI that kept the data had to admit, as sympathetic as they were to assault weapons ban, that actually it doesn't appear to have really made any difference. We want to talk about crime since then. We can talk about the big cities that have come under control of Democratic authority who have pushed for things like no bond. But John Adams had it exactly right. This Constitution is intended for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the governing of any other. So we're either going to have to get rid of all of our constitutional rights. We can't even allow freedom of assembly or speech, much less Second Amendment, if we're not going to teach moral right and wrong. And what are we finding? We're finding in our schools, of course, they're not teaching the Ten Commandments, and instead they're teaching to envy, look around, covet, see who has something more than you, and you should envy and covet it. And just keep in mind, under the big city laws now, look, if you get violent, we'll give you no bond, we'll let you right back out. You want to know what would do more right now than banning AR-15s would be to ban Democrat thinking in the big cities that's allowing the crime rates to just explode. We've always had guns in America. That's why there is an America. But we've never had a time like this when we were teaching our children everything but the moral imperatives. That's why this bill needs to go down, and we need to go after the causes of our violence. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Garcia.
Ms. Garcia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of reinstating the assault weapons ban. This bill would put military-grade assault weapons out of circulation for civilians. For me, the choice between banning assault weapons and protecting young, innocent children is a no-brainer. I put children above guns. It pains me deeply that our children and our communities live in fear of suddenly losing their lives or the lives of loved ones on a daily basis. I am a gun owner myself, Mr. Speaker. I was raised on a farm in South Texas, and I know how to use a gun, especially for hunting. But assault weapons are not for hunting. They are used to kill people quickly, efficiently, and as fast as they can. And that type of weapon is used solely for that, for killing people, and it has no place in our communities. One child's life is worth more than all the assault weapons in the world. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Mr. Klein's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My fellow Americans, the Democrats are coming for your guns. This assault weapons ban is unconstitutional because it would ban firearms that are currently in common use, making the scope of the bill's semi-automatic assault weapon ban overly broad by capturing millions of sporting rifles, shotguns, and pistols that simply have certain accessories and cosmetic features. In fact, the bill focuses mostly on appearance, which would arbitrarily ban some firearm models while exempting others with the same functionality. This bill would not reduce violent crime, as Democrats claim, since studies have shown that the effect of the last assault weapons ban from 1994 on violent crime was perhaps too small for reliable measurement. Instead, what this bill and all other legislation from Democrats aimed at gun control will do is directly infringe on the rights of law-abiding Americans. And they're not going to stop here. There'll always be another scary-looking gun that they think looks scary that needs to be banned. There'll always be another loophole that they have created out of thin air that they need to close with more bans. Mr. Speaker, this document says shall not be infringed. I urge a no vote on this bill.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Jordan reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
Mr. Neguse is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Speaker and I thank the Chairman for his leadership. I rise today in support of H.R. 1808. As the Speaker knows, a fellow Coloradan, just last year we mourned the loss of 10 individuals who were shot, murdered at a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado, in my district. Last week we honored the 10-year anniversary of the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting. The people in our communities fear whether they are even safe to walk into their local grocery store and buy food for their families without the threat of gun violence. Since the federal assault weapons ban expired in 2004, the scourge of gun violence has only grown more pervasive across our country. We have come together in the past to protect our communities. In 1994, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle joined together to pass a similar piece of legislation to that we are voting on today. I'd humbly ask my colleagues that we do the same this evening. Let's pass this bill for our children and for safer communities. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the ranking member, Mr. Speaker. Today I'm voting against the erosion of constitutional rights of law-abiding Americans. In the long history of mankind, freedom and liberty are not lost overnight, but it comes by way of a slow and gradual burn. We've seen an unprecedented assault on our First Amendment through the legacy media and social media, giants censoring the thoughts and opinions and individuals of the right while propping up their favorite candidates and covering up stories that could be detrimental to their public personas. Policies are then implemented that are anti-religious freedom, anti-due process, anti-free assembly, and today, anti-Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. These rights shall not be infringed. Instead of making families and communities safer, this backward gun-grabbing attempt does nothing to harden school security, address our mental health crisis, or reverse the depreciation of our morals and values. No, it does nothing for that, but it tears at the fabric of our Constitution. I urge my colleagues to protect the Constitution and vote no. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a member of the committee, the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Ms. Dean is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 4 grandchildren. The youngest, Scotty, was born just last year in 2021. In Scotty's world, guns kill more kids than cars do. In Scotty's world, there are 692 mass shootings every year. And when she goes off to school, Scotty will learn her active shooter drills as she learns to tie her shoes. We don't have to live like this. If we only had the courage, if we all only had the courage to pass the assault weapons ban to regulate semi-automatic guns. Our gun violence crisis demands this and other solutions. This will save lives. Experts reveal that the casualties of mass shootings would have dropped by 70% if the last assault weapons ban had stayed in place. How will I explain to Scotty that the other side boasts of 24 million assault-style weapons in the hands of Americans and says not one word about the 24,000 people dead in just 7 months of this year from guns? We must act join me, have the courage to join me, pass the assault weapons ban for Scotty's future and for all of our children. I yield
Gentlelady's
back.
time has expired. Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
Mr. Roy is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thanks, Speaker. I thank the gentleman from Ohio. Fact, this assault weapon ban bill is unconstitutional. Chairman Nadler even recognized when he stated that, quote, the problem is that these weapons are in common use. And in Heller, the Supreme Court ruled that the Bill of Rights clearly protects firearms in common use. This is an unconstitutional piece of legislation. Fact, this assault weapons bill will ban the weapons in common use, and my colleagues will most assuredly target citizens to take their guns. In the words of Democratic perpetual candidate Beto O'Rourke, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. That's the truth, and everyone knows it. Don't hide behind it. Everybody knows precisely what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are doing. Fact, less than 2% of all prisoners had a firearm obtained from a retail source at the time they committed their crimes. Only 13% of the offenders in state prison population obtained their firearms from a retail source. Criminals usually don't get their guns at gun stores through legal channels. That's the fact. Another fact, upwards of 80% are committed by people with prior arrest records, often by people with prior convictions for violent crimes or prior weapons offenses, and almost none of our gun control proposals, and particularly this one, are targeted at this group. That's the truth. Those are the facts. The fact, as Thomas Jefferson said, the strongest reason for the people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is as a last resort to protect themselves against tyranny and government, the precise kind of tyranny that my colleagues are exercising today. Precisely when they're opening our borders up to lawless cartels and gangs, precisely when they're defunding the police, precisely when they're making our communities unsafe, they want to limit the ability of the American people to defend themselves and to exercise their Second Amendment rights to protect their families. That's what's happening on the floor, so my colleagues can appeal to their liberal white voters while they ignore the black men and women and brown men and women who are buying weapons to defend themselves in criminal hellholes in our country.
Gentleman's
I yield
time
back.
has expired. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Contrary to Mr. Roy, this bill takes away nobody's weapons because existing weapons are grandfathered in, if you'd only read the bill. Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, a member of the Judiciary Committee, Ms. Escobar.
Ms. Escobar is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the assault weapons ban, which will save lives. Mr. Speaker, El Paso is coming up on a terrible anniversary. On August 3rd, 2019, my district was the site of the deadliest targeted attack on Latinos in modern history. 3 years later, my constituents are still recovering from their injuries. And because Republicans have decided that unfettered access to assault weapons is worth the routine slaughter of Americans, the domestic terrorist who attacked my community was able to do so with a legally purchased assault weapon. What was once an unthinkable tragedy, the mass carnage we saw in El Paso, is now commonplace across America. Americans are fed up, and so am I. Republicans have done nothing meaningful and hide behind thoughts and prayers, a phrase so empty and devoid of action that Congress is routinely and deservedly mocked for it. So today, I'm proud to act, and I'm proud to vote on the assault weapon ban. For El Paso, for Uvalde, for countless communities, I urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Mr. Bishop is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, the Democrats give new meaning to the term progressive. This is the first time in American history, I believe, that a chamber of the Congress will pass a bill openly defying the Supreme Court's explicit declaration of the constitutional rights of the American people. It represents the farthest ever reach of the Democrats' long-pursued massive resistance doctrine. In markup, I asked if any Democrat disputed that this bill bans guns and magazines in common use. Chairman Nadler candidly responded quote, that's the point of the bill. In other words, the essence of the bill is to stop commerce in weapons, as alternatively described by the court in Heller in 2008, as those, quote, typically possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes, close quote. Heller explained the origins of the right to keep and bear arms in militia service. Ordinarily, when called for militia service, able-bodied men were expected to appear bearing arms supplied by themselves and of the kind in common use at the time. The Supreme Court further explained, we also recognize another important limitation on the right to keep and bear and carry arms. Miller said, as we have explained, that the sort of weapons protected were those, quote, in common use at the time. This was explained and recapitulated in Bruin just a month ago on June 23. And we see repeatedly that this is being defied. In fact, 1 week after Bruin, the Supreme Court granted petitions for certiorari, vacated and remanded one state ban on MSRs and a state ban on magazines in common use to be reconsidered.
Gentleman's time has expired.
This is defiance of the Supreme Court, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, contrary to Mr. Roy, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a report from Third Way entitled The Red State Murder Problem.
Without objection.
And, Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of this assault weapons ban to reclaim our streets, churches, schools, and synagogues. Assault weapons are killing machines and the weapon of choice for mass murderers. In my own county in Parkland, a lone teenager slaughtered 17 people by himself, all because he had an assault weapon. This deranged individual tragically, brutally killed and then overturned the lives of those families and forever changed our entire community. But this is no isolated case. Similar mass murders haunt Las Vegas, El Paso, Buffalo, Uvalde, Orlando, Pittsburgh, and too many other communities for me to list here today. No parent should fear seeing a child off to a mall, movie theater, or school, knowing that a killer wielding a weapon designed to kill as many people as possible, as fast as possible, may lay in wait for them. We need a whole-of-government solution to this health epidemic, including enforced ammunition background checks. But let's take these killing machines off our streets and end this fear that one person with one assault weapon in one moment can tragically tear countless lives apart. Republicans, take note. The Supreme Court clearly allows limitations on weapons in their decisions.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Doesn't make it true. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the ranking member. There is a motion to recommit that I would like to offer. If we adopt a motion to recommit, we will instruct the House Committee on Judiciary consider the amendment to H.R. 1808, which excludes active duty and retired military from the ban on assault weapons. I therefore ask unanimous consent to include the text of the amendment in the record immediately prior to the vote on the motion to recommit.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, just imagine you're a 17-year-old who makes a decision to enlist in the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, and then that 17-year-old goes through 8 weeks of basic combat training, BCT, at one of the basic training centers in Fort Jackson or Fort Knox or Fort Benning. And then they're given a service weapon, an M16 typically, and taught to assemble, disassemble that weapon down to the bolt. They'll go through the training with the drill sergeant. They'll be on a range, on a live fire range with this service weapon. And then the 17-year-old will go to AIT to be taught their specialty and continue to be on active duty or in the reserves or in the National Guard and then potentially deployed. What this bill seeks to do is prevent this member of the military who comes home either to the Reserve Unit or National Guard unit or on active duty from purchasing a rifle that they can use on their own. My colleagues who support the bill are saying, we trusted you to join the service. We encouraged you to join the service. But then when it comes down to it, we really don't trust you to go out and purchase that weapon. It makes no sense. If the majority is going to snub every veteran in this country by saying, we don't trust you, how can the U.S. government ask someone to enlist when they don't trust them to have the same responsibility with their own personal weapon? Mr. Speaker, if we adopt the motion to recommit, we will instruct the Committee on Judiciary to consider my amendment to H.R. 1808 to ensure that the nation's active duty members and veterans will be
Gentleman's
trusted.
time has expired.
30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized for another 30 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, it's still amazing to me that the majority rejected this in the Judiciary Committee. They talk a good game when it comes to veterans, but when it comes right down to it, they don't trust them. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider.
Mr. Schneider, sorry. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute. Mr. Schneider is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in emphatic support of H.R. 1808, the assault weapons ban of 2022. Over the past few weeks, survivors of the horrific shooting in Highland Park, Illinois, came to D.C. determined to make change. They teamed up with families from Uvalde, Parkland, and Newtown to demand an assault weapons ban to reduce the chance of other communities experiencing the trauma they all tragically bear. Today, thanks in no small part to their efforts, the American people will get that recorded vote. The world is watching. No other nation experiences a grotesque number of murders from deranged individuals turning weapons of war on kids in school, families at prayer, people watching a parade. The vote we are taking today will show the families of those murdered exactly who is on their side, who is protecting our children and putting people over politics, and conversely, who is on the other side voting for their own power. I thank Speaker Pelosi and Congressman Cicilline for working tirelessly to secure a timely vote, and I urge passage of this bill. I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair will advise the managers. Mr. Nadler has 13 minutes. Mr. Jordan has 11 minutes. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde.
Mr. Clyde is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you to the gentleman from Ohio. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 1808, which is just the latest gun-grabbing bill Democrats are dangerously ramming through their unconstitutional crusade to disarm America. The ink is barely dry on this anti-gun bill from last month, and here they are pushing another anti-gun bill that proclaims to make us safer, but does the exact opposite. It puts citizens at greater risk by taking away the rights of the law-abiding. This legislation takes aim at our Constitution by banning what the Democrats call assault weapons, which is a vague political term used as a catchphrase to make the public think they are banning guns that assault people. But the truth is, the bill would ban the most popular semi-automatic rifle in America, the AR-15, and what the industry calls modern sporting rifles. The Democrats have consistently called them weapons of war and are trying to ban them from being purchased by law-abiding citizens. But who does this bill exempt? The federal government. Federal government agencies like the Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of Housing and Urban Development, and down the line. So if they're weapons of war, as the Democrats call them, what do these departments need with weapons of war? Is the Department of Education going to use them against the moms and dads who protest against woke local school board policies? Is the Department of Housing and Urban Development going to use them against the occupants in their housing developments? You cannot have it both ways. If it's a weapon of war, then ban these federal agencies too. The truth is they are simply a semi-automatic rifle the Democrats want to demonize so they can ban more guns and take away more of our citizens' unalienable constitutional rights. Democrat ignorance and malice do not justify banning nearly 25 million firearms that Americans, including myself, proudly own and responsibly use. Now, I know the author of this legislation would prefer that I spare him both the prefatory clause and the supremacy clause of the Second Amendment, but it is quite clear, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed, period, is the supremacy clause. And banning an entire class of firearms, the most popular firearm in common use today, is clearly infringement. An armed America is a safe and free America. I urge all of my colleagues to stand firm in the fight to protect and preserve the Second Amendment by voting no on this unconstitutional and therefore illegal piece of legislation. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter of endorsement of the assault weapons ban from the Major Cities Chiefs Association, a professional organization of law enforcement executives representing the largest cities in the United States.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a report from the Violence Policy Center entitled Target Law Enforcement Assault Weapons in the News.
Without objection.
I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins.
Mr. Higgins is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, no technology advances more quickly in our society than technology of killing. Every day, weapons of mass destruction are being made and manipulated to kill more people more quickly. Buffalo, New York, May 14th, one shooter, a racist shooter, went into a supermarket on Jefferson Avenue and shot 13 people, killing 10 of them. The shooting started and was completed in 2 minutes and 3 seconds. One shooter. I often heard it said that the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. There was a good guy with a gun in the store that day that was working security, a retired 30-year veteran of the Buffalo Police Department. But he was helpless because he was outgunned by the bad guy with the gun who had an assault rifle. I thank Mr. Cicilline for his leadership on this issue, for his thoughtful approach to this, and I urge my colleagues to support this legislation.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu.
Ms. Chu is recognized for 1 minute.
We are the only country in the world where mass shootings continuously happen. They happen in schools, grocery stores, malls, hospitals, parades, you name it. In America, there has not been a single week in 2022 without a mass shooting. Weapons of war especially have no place in our streets or schools or our grocery stores. They have no place in nail salons or churches or shopping malls. About their horrific impact on children like this, a trauma surgeon said, the tissue destruction is almost unimaginable. Bones are exploded. Soft tissue is absolutely destroyed. It's like a bomb went off. But we in Congress can end this. We can end this uniquely American plague of mass death caused by gun violence. I support the assault weapons ban because we cannot wait to act until the next mass shooting. We must pass this bill today.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Mr. Green is recognized for 1 minute.
And still I rise, Mr. Speaker. I rise to announce that I will vote for this legislation, and I will do so because I know that there are 19 babies who were murdered at Robb Elementary School in Texas who will never have the right to vote. I rise to vote for it because there are 2 teachers who were murdered who will never have the opportunity to seek the future that was theirs. I rise because we have a governor in the state of Texas who could have saved all of those lives if he had but only, after the shooting at Walmart that took 23 lives, passed legislation such as what we're passing today. I rise because I don't want the blood of the next person murdered with an AR-15 type weapon on my hands. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We will continue to reserve, Mr.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Gentlelady from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I've heard a lot of talk today about the Constitution. Well, when the Founding Fathers wrote the Second Amendment, these kind of weapons didn't even exist. They had muskets and flintlock pistols that could fire 3 or 4 shots in a minute in a good day, and they weren't very accurate at all. Founding Fathers did not know or anticipate these weapons of mass destruction that shooters use today to kill as many innocent people as brutally and quickly as possible. And that's exactly what they did in my district on October the 1st, 2070, when you had 60 people shot at a concert. I urge my colleagues on the other side to have the courage to stand up to the NRA and support this legislation. It's common sense, it's necessary, and it will prevent mass shootings and save lives. I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from
Reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Then the gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, the distinguished gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
Ms. DeLauro is recognized for 1 minute.
26 souls, including 20 babies, massacred at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Parkland, Buffalo, Uvalde. The common denominator, an AR-15 style assault weapon, the weapon of choice. 8 of the 10 deadliest mass shootings involved an assault weapon. We cannot be numb to this needless violence. It is long past time for us to act. In Connecticut, the tragedy at Sandy Hook changed our lives forever. These are unspeakable tragedies. They are avoidable tragedies, and they're happening in our schools, our grocery stores, our places of worship. The legislation before us today will reduce the prevalence of assault weapons, ban the purchase of assault weapons, get them off of our streets, make our communities safer, protect our children, save their lives. Is that not the noblest of goals? To save lives. We have the opportunity to do that in this body today. Enough is enough.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would yield 5 minutes to the chair of the Second Amendment Caucus, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Massey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the gentleman from Ohio. If facts are the ammunition of debate, I'd like to point out that the other side of the aisle entered this room unarmed. There's so many mischaracterizations, or misfires, if you will, about this bill and what this bill does that I don't know where to start. But let me start here with the words of the author of this bill. He says it will ban weapons of war only suitable for soldiers in combat. Is that what it does? Does it ban an M16? It doesn't ban an M16 or an M4. It bans the most commonly sold rifle in the United States today and for the last several years. It doesn't ban weapons of war. It explicitly exempts the M1 Garand. General Patton said the M1 Garand is the finest implement of battle ever devised. Why is it exempted? It's a weapon of war. It exempts the M1 carbine. Look at the picture of the soldiers, the Marines at Iwo Jima. What were they carrying? The M1 carbine. It exempts the quintessential Cold War weapon, the pride of the Chinese and the communists, the SKS. It's exempted in this bill. These are literal weapons of war that are not in this bill. Now, they'll come back and ban those, but they don't want to ban them right now because they don't look scary enough. They have a wooden forestock and a wooden butt. They're not made of plastic. They don't look like the scary stuff on the news, so they have no interest in banning that. Literal, actual weapons of war are not banned, but the most common firearm sold today is banned. But let's take them at their word. Weapons of war, these are weapons of war. We got to ban weapons of war. Well, they exempt 80-some federal agencies from the ban. Literally every bureaucratic agency in the government can have a weapon of war under this bill. Weapons of war, as they call them. So we offered an amendment in the committee. We couldn't conceive of why the Department of Education would need a weapon of war to complete their mission of educating our children, coming up with the curriculum. We couldn't conceive of why the USDA would need weapons of war. So we offered an amendment to exempt the USDA and the Department of Education from being able to have these weapons of war, so-called weapons of war. Every Democrat, even though they couldn't give us a good reason of why these agencies would need weapons of war or with whom they plan to go to war, are they bringing them to the school board? Where are they going to bring these things? Now, they couldn't give a good reason why these agencies would need weapons of war, but they all voted to allow these agencies to have weapons of war. Now, the reason we came to that conclusion is they aren't weapons of war. It's the most common firearm sold in the United States today. These are not weapons of war. There was one Democrat who did articulate a reason. He said, well, they're actually good for defense. You might need them to defend the Department of Education. Well, that's what the Second Amendment is about. It's not about making sure that the Department of Education, which, by the way, is unconstitutional, but it's not making sure that the Department of Education can have proper defense. It's for the people to have proper defense. So that's the first falsehood. Now, here's another reason that gun owners should be concerned about this bill. Maybe you don't own one of these firearms, but if you own guns, you know about terminal ballistics. You know what are suitable calibers for hunting deer, for hunting coyotes. We've heard it said here today and in the committee, and they showed us a video. Oh, the terminal ballistics of a .223 round are so dangerous that we need to ban these AR-15s because they shoot .223 rounds. What they didn't show you was a video of a deer cartridge, like a 30-06 or a 7mm or a 308. If the purpose of this legislation is to ban these firearms because they shoot a cartridge with those terminal ballistics of a .223, then you absolutely plan to come after deer rifles because they have 2 and 3 times as much power, 2 and 3 times as much destructive and killing power as the cartridge used in the firearm that you seek to ban here today. Another falsehood, this bill will save lives. Let me get to this. We heard it here today. I was waiting for it. It was mentioned a couple times. Even the Speaker of the House mentioned it. They have said that the 94 to 2004 assault weapons ban, so-called assault weapons, reduced crime. The crime went down. Well, guess what? From 95 to 2004, there were 2 million of these firearms imported or manufactured and sold.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Yield the gentleman additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for another 30 seconds.
The number of these rifles doubled in the United States during your last assault weapons ban. If you think crime went down because of the last assault weapons ban, then you've got some explaining to do because the number of those rifles increased. Maybe, just maybe, people became safer. I urge opposition to this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio is reserved. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Mr. Connolly is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman. We face 2 choices today in this body. One is to protect our children, to protect our houses of worship, to protect where we shop, to protect when we watch a movie from guns that exist for one purpose only: mass death inflicted efficiently. Or we can listen to the other argument, which you've heard. Enthrall to the gun manufacturers to protect them at any cost. And you, as a citizen, are collateral damage at the altar of the gun manufacturers, and we will be bathed in blood forever. It is time to act. It is time to end the madness and disenthrall ourselves from automatic weapons that are mass killers. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Nadler reserves.
Reserve.
Mr. Jordan reserves. Mr. Nadler is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Majority Leader of the House, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer.
Mr. Hoyer is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. This is, of course, an emotional debate. Some have talked about fear, and they instill fear in the process. As Mr. Nadler has pointed out, no weapons are taken away. A number of members on the other side of the aisle have gotten up and said this is an unconstitutional bill. Yet, from 1994 to 2004, that bill was tested in the courts. None of those courts found that unconstitutional. In the Heller case, which has been quoted over and over again, a very simple statement was made by that super liberal, Antonin Scalia. He said, like most rights, the rights secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. From Blackstone through the 19th century cases, commentators and courts routinely explained that the right was not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever for whatever purposes. One indication of that, of course, is that we have a ban on machine guns in America. Now, one could answer, well, they're not in common use. That's correct, because they're banned. 67% of Americans support an assault weapon ban. 53%, over half, strongly support, and another 14% somewhat support, for a total of 67%. That's in a poll by the Morning Consult on May 25th, 22. There was another poll by Pew in September of 21 that said that 63% of Americans support. Both polls, over 60% of Americans, over 2/3 of Americans, think this action makes sense. I'm sure the founders, as they were discussing the Second Amendment, debated whether we ought to have mass rapid-fire weapons covered by the Second Amendment. They had no idea such weapons certainly didn't exist, and they acted within the framework of the times in which they lived. Mr. Speaker, Congress must take action today to protect all Americans from dangerous and deadly assault weapons. If we do so, we will still be the country who has the most weapons per capita in the world, more weapons than people, which would seem to think, therefore, we ought to be the least dangerous nation if the premise that there are more people that are armed, the less crime we'll have. Seems a little counterintuitive to me. The weapons that we're talking about are able to kill large numbers rapidly. Used to kill 6 adults and 20 children at Sandy Hook. Used to kill 61 people in Las Vegas. Used to kill 19 students and 2 teachers in Uvalde, Texas, just a few weeks ago. From Aurora to Orlando, San Bernardino to Buffalo, El Paso, and Highland Park. They've been mentioned today. And we ought to mention them on a regular basis to remind us. We have watched assault weapons inflict mass destruction in our communities time and time and time again. Not only do these weapons claim the lives of innocent civilians, they frequently kill members of law enforcement who've worked to keep their communities safe. That's why law enforcement largely, not all of them, support this bill, because they see that as one of the greatest dangers to their lives. Indeed, one study by the Violence Policy Center found that nearly a quarter of all the police officers killed in the line of duty between 2016 and 2017 were killed by the same firearms that would be outlawed under this ban. Of those police officers killed by assault weapons, almost a quarter of them were wearing body armor that was nevertheless penetrated by a bullet. These types of attack and police killings are not inevitable. We know there's a better way. We know that because these attacks became far less common when an overwhelmingly bipartisan coalition, this was not some Democratic bill. It was a bipartisan bill. I'll speak more to that in just a second. Came together in '94 to pass a ban, including 46 House Republicans. That measure had support from law enforcement and from both Democratic and Republican presidents, including Ronald Reagan. After Republicans were in control of Congress, they allowed that ban to expire in 2004. Mass shootings tripled. Today, I'm pleased to bring Mr. Cicilline's bill to the floor to reinstate America's assault. Reinstate a bill that has been taken to the court already. This legislation would prohibit the possession of manufacture, sale, and transfer of semi-automatic assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. It does not take any of those away from any citizen. To be clear, we are not undermining the Second Amendment. I am for a person having the right to have a weapon, not only to hunt, but in his home, in his business, to protect himself and his family, and where authorized, to carry upon his person where authorized. This bill will not lead to confiscation of firearms, notwithstanding the fear that has been expressed. Weapons that were legally purchased before its enactment. However, it will set safety requirements. Doesn't that make sense? We have safety requirements for our cars. Doesn't it make sense to have safety requirements for weapons that can kill? Additionally, this legislation will provide funding for buyback programs for those who would prefer to be responsible neighbors and community members and relinquish their assault weapons voluntarily. But of course, our NRA friends have this slippery slope concept that anything we do, even banning cop killer bullets, goes too far because the next step and the next step and the next step. These common sense reforms will save the lives of law enforcement officers and innocent Americans across the country. The Speaker spoke that we're going to bring additional community safety legislation to the floor to support our police, because as much as the Republicans would like to say we Democrats are for defunding the police, it is absolutely incorrect and false, and they know it. Why do they know it? Because we bring appropriation bills to this floor which fund the police, not only at the national level, but at the state and local level as well, which gives lie to the assertion that we are for. Are there some people who use that comment? Look in the mirror, folks. There's some people on your side of the aisle who say absurd things. There are many people on both sides of the aisle who say Let's support and protect police. This is a way to do it. Today we have an opportunity to put votes behind our words and show who is ready to do exactly that. Now I hope my Republican friends and Democratic friends and my fellow Americans will listen to the quote that I'm about to give from a president that used to be revered on the Republican side of the aisle, but is now not looked at as such a reverential figure. Ronald Reagan said this: "Listen to the American public and to the law enforcement community and support a ban on the further manufacture of these weapons." A moment of silence is not enough. I'm not sure, I should have counted how many moments of silence we have had on this floor this year and lamented the loss of children and the elderly and everybody in between because of a weapon that is designed to kill a lot of people quickly. No more moments of silence. Let's act. Vote yes. Pass this bill.
Gentleman from Maryland yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we haven't said the Second Amendment was unlimited. We quoted the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, which the Supreme Court has said protects firearms in common use. 24 million Americans have these weapons out there. That is most certainly common use. And the fact that the chair of the Judiciary Committee says, I don't care, we're going to do it even though we know it's unconstitutional, that is just wrong. With that, I yield 1 minute to my friend, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Arrington.
As for 1 minute.
Too often, Mr. Speaker, we skip over the fundamental principle and precept and driver of the Second Amendment, so let's reaffirm our faith here. Our founders were determined to fight against their own government for our freedom and independence. They stated unequivocally that when there were a train of abuses and usurpations and the citizens were reduced to absolute despotism, it was our right and our duty to throw off that government. We wouldn't have these United States. We wouldn't be here today without this sacred Second Amendment. Every law-abiding citizen in America must be able to meet evil with equal or greater force, whether it's a violent criminal, a crazed killer, or a coercive government. We should, Mr. Speaker, we must reject this attempt to trample the Constitution, violate the spirit of what those founders wrote into that sacred document, and to disarm our citizens. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair will advise the managers. Mr. Jordan has 1 minute. Mr. Nadler has 6 minutes. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the previous speaker on the Republican side said that citizens must be able to meet the government with equal arms. The United States government has hydrogen bombs. Does he think that every citizen ought to have a hydrogen bomb? Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin.
Mr. Langevin is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I know the damage that guns can cause firsthand. When I was 16, an accidental gunshot severed my spinal cord and left me paralyzed. And yet the damage caused by that gun pales in comparison to the destruction caused by assault weapons, whose sole purpose is to inflict maximum damage on their targets. No one needs an assault weapon to go deer hunting. No one needs an assault weapon to defend their home. These weapons of war simply have no place on our streets. After all, it's no coincidence that assault weapons were the firearm of choice for the killers in Uvalde, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Parkland, Orlando, Sandy Hook, and the list goes on. So I ask my colleagues, does this body have the courage to stop the next massacre from taking place? Or will we shirk from our responsibilities and our duty content to simply offer thoughts and prayers while Americans, and even small children, are mowed down in our schools, grocery stores, and places of worship. I know which side I'm on, and I hope my colleagues will join me. I thank Congressman Cicilline for his steadfast work on bringing this legislation to the floor. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky.
Gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Strong support of the assault weapons ban. I live very close to Highland Park, Illinois, and I have heard from literally hundreds of people and met with hundreds of people, students, teachers, parents, and small business owners, and yes, even law enforcement officials who demand that we have and pass an assault weapons ban. Today's vote would not be possible without the fearless and tireless work of advocates and survivors. This day is for them. And I think that there is no rational reason that we would allow these weapons of mass destruction to be on the streets of our country that ravages our families, our communities, and even our way of life. And I urge a yes vote to ban assault weapons. I yield back.
Ms. Schakowsky yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Kaptur.
Ms. Kaptur is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Americans want their freedom back, and I would say to my colleague from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, your freedom stops where mine begins, and that of my constituents begin. Schools, shopping malls, grocery stores, Independence Day parades shouldn't be scenes of mass carnage and bloodshed. Weapons of war have no place on the streets of America. An experienced Ohio sheriff says it well. Assault weapons and large capacity magazines should only be utilized by the military and law enforcement. A proposal to ban their use is common sense, supported by a majority of Americans. Until such time that members of Congress start to care about the safety of children in our schools more than their next re-election, mass shootings will continue to occur and innocent people will die. One of the most experienced chiefs of police I represent says the following: the connection between guns and illicit drugs is 100%. So let's take the two most important steps: remove large capacity assault weapons from our streets and arrest the drug dealers who are creating death and destruction across our country. Let's give freedom back to the American people, and I yield back.
Time has expired. Gentlelady yields back. The chair will remind the members to direct their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio reserves.
Well, I would just say if the gentlelady from Ohio wants to come to the 4th District of Ohio and debate me on the Second Amendment, I'd welcome her to come anytime she wants to our district. She can stand here and lecture all she wants, but I'd welcome her to come to our district. I'd be happy to debate her. And my guess is the constituents I get the privilege of representing, most of them probably agree with me and agree with the United States Constitution. I reserve.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Cohen.
Mr. Cohen is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chairman. This has been an interesting debate. The cumulative debate from the Republican side have been members who've been wanting to show their knowledge of weapons, their intimate knowledge of weapons. They're almost a fetishism with weapons, something that only Freud would properly understand and be able to explain to the American people. They've talked about hands being dangerous and knives being dangerous, but hands and knives and other weapons that they discussed don't kill people in volume and number like AR-15s do. The CIA did a study and said that even shots to extremities all made fatal impacts on people. The AR-15 is an outgrowth of a military weapon that was designed for military use. The AR-15 is a weapon that destroys people's bodies, kills them quickly, and it should not be allowed in a civilized, safe society, particularly for children and for people in the general public. I urge passage of the bill. I will yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, how much time does each side have?
The gentleman from Ohio has 45 seconds.
We're prepared to close.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, red flag laws take all guns from some people. This bill makes illegal some guns for all people, and we know where they want to go. We know what they want to do. They want to take all guns from all people because they can't stand the Second Amendment. They hate the Second Amendment. In fact, during the markup, the sponsor of the legislation said this, quote, "Spare me the BS about constitutional rights." Well, Republicans care about law-abiding citizens' constitutional liberties, their First Amendment rights, their Second Amendment rights, their Fourth Amendment due process rights, and all of those have been attacked by the Democrats over the last several months. That's why we should vote no on this legislation and let law-abiding Americans have the respect for the Second Amendment they deserve. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it is no surprise that assault weapons are the weapon of choice for mass shooters and those who target law enforcement. They are designed for ruthless efficiency, killing the most people in the shortest amount of time. And the gentleman from Ohio was right. I did say in the committee, spare us the BS. I meant the Republican BS about the Constitution, about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is designed not to allow people to fight the government. Do we want to take up arms against American troops? Is that what they say? That is what they say. We saw what that did with the insurrection we had recently, and that was a mild case. No, the assault weapons, but the Second Amendment is designed to allow for a well-regulated militia, which is to say in our day, the National Guard. The assault weapons ban would take the weapons of war off our streets and save countless lives, and that is why it is supported by all associations of police, by the American Federation of Teachers, the American College of Physicians, the American Public Health Association, the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, the Major Cities Police Chiefs Association. They know what they're doing. The assault weapons ban would take these weapons of war off our streets. It would prevent more of the Uvaldes, more of the Parklands, more of the Tree of Life synagogues. I urge all members to support this important legislation, and I yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman yields back. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1302, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor shall say aye. Those opposed shall say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Third reading of the bill.
A bill to regulate assault weapons to ensure that the right to keep and bear arms is not unlimited and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Fitzgerald of Wisconsin moves to recommit the bill H.R. 1808 to the Committee on the Judiciary.
Pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 19, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor shall say aye. Aye. All those opposed shall say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
And the nays.
Gentleman from Wisconsin requests the yeas and nays. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage. This is a 15-minute vote. Does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Sewell of Alabama, I inform the House that Ms. Sewell will vote no on the motion to recommit.
Purposes, the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Tiffany from Wisconsin, I inform the House that Mr. Tiffany will vote aye on the motion to recommit.
Ready? What purposes the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Mr. Mark Desaulniers of California, Mr. David Scott of Georgia, and Mr. Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, I inform the House that these members will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Dakota seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Taylor from Texas and Ms. Maliotakis from New York, I inform the House that they will vote yes on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition? The gentleman from Colorado seeks recognition for...
Thanks, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Ms. Diana DeGette of Colorado and Mr. Tom Suozzi of New York, I inform the House that these members will vote no on the motion to recommit. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Schakowsky of Illinois, I inform the House that Ms. Schakowsky will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does my friend from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Smucker and pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Smucker will vote yea on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
As a member designated by Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Veazey, I inform the House that Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Veazey will vote no on the motion to recommit.
Purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Speaker Perlmutter, as the gentleman designated by Mr. John Carter of Texas, Kay Granger of Texas, Troy Nails of Texas, and Paul Gilzar of Arizona, I inform the House they will all vote yea on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, happy birthday. Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congress members Cahaley, Mike Thompson, Andy Levin, Bordeaux, Vargas, Swalwell, Richie Torres, Cuellar, Panetta, and Keating, inform the House that these members will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. McHenry of North Carolina, Mr. Barr of Kentucky, and Mr. Guthrie of Kentucky, I inform the House that Mr. Barr, Mr. Guthrie, and Mr. McHenry will vote yea on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Neal of Massachusetts, I inform the House that Mr. Neal will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated for Mr. Wenstrup of Ohio and Mr. LaHood of Illinois, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Wenstrup and Mr. LaHood will both vote aye on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New Hampshire seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Stevens, Ms. Bustos, Ms. Craig, Ms. Frankel, Ms. Dingle, Mr. Blumenauer, and Mr. Ryan, I inform the House that these members will vote no on the motion to recommit.
What purpose does my friend from Colorado seek recognition?
As a member designated by Ms. Williams, Ms. Moore, Mr. Caston, Ms. Bass, Mr. Evans, Ms. Sherflis McCormick, and Ms. Strickland, I inform the House and the distinguished speaker from the great state of Colorado that these members will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Macbeth of Georgia, pursuant to HBS 8, I inform the House that Ms. Macbeth will vote no on the motion to recommit.
Does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Spear of California and Ms. Leger Fernandez of New Mexico, I inform the House that these members will vote no on the motion to recommit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Representative Mike Johnson, Louisiana, I inform the House that Representative Johnson will vote yes on the motion to recommit.
God, every time I... For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Dr. Joyce of Pennsylvania, Mr. Rashenthaler of Pennsylvania, Ms. Stefanik of New York, Mr. Comer of Kentucky, and Dr. Miller Meeks of Iowa, I inform the House that they will all vote yes on the motion to recommit.
Does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Cardenas, I inform the House that Mr. Cardenas will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Porter, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote no on the motion to recommit.
The gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Van Drew, Mr. Green of Tennessee, Mr. Guest of Mississippi, Mr. Crawford of Arkansas, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Palazzo of Mississippi, and Mr. Lamborn of Colorado, and Mr. Desjardins of Tennessee, I inform the House that Mr. Van Drew, Mr. Green, Mr. Guest, Mr. Crawford, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Palazzo, Mr. Lamborn, and Mr. Desjardins all will vote yea on the motion to recommit. Thank you.
What purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Bush, Mr. Bowman, Ms. Presley, Ms. Tlaib, and Ms. Stanbury, I inform the House that these members will vote no on the motion to recommit.
What purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mrs. Miller of West Virginia, I inform the House that Mrs. Miller will vote aye on the motion to recommit.
What purpose does the gentlelady from New York rise?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Representative Mr. Jeffries of New York pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Representative Jeffries will vote nay on the Republican motion to recommit H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Gibbs from Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gibbs will vote yea on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Christ and Lawson of Florida, and Mr. Deutsch of Florida, Ms. Rice, Carolyn Maloney of New York, and Mr. Smith of Washington, I inform the House that these members will vote nay on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Rice of South Carolina, Mr. Katko, and Mr. Katko of New York, I inform the House that Mrs. Rice and Katko will vote yea on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Babin of Texas, I inform the House Mr. Babin will vote yea on the motion to recommit.
Oh, So for what purpose does the gentlelady from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Texas and Mr. Hearn of Oklahoma, I inform the House that Mr. Hearn and Mr. Gonzalez will vote aye on the motion to recommit.
Did you?
The House that Mr. Wilson will be voting yea on the motion to recommit.
Does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Stewart, Vletlo, Ms. Catherine Porras Rogers, Mr. Owens, Conway, Herrera Butler, Garbarino, Curtis, I inform the House that they will all vote yea on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose? For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Representatives Lloyd Doggett and Ilhan Omar, I inform the House that these members will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose? For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
As a member designated by Ms. Steele of California, I inform the House that Ms. Steele will vote yea on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Waltz and Mr. Jimenez of Florida, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Albio Series, Ms. Ann Kirkpatrick, Mr. Jerry McNerney, Ms. Eddie Bernice Johnson, Ms. Pramila Jayapal, Mr. John Garamendi, Mr. Donald Payne, Mr. Peter Welch, inform the House that these members will vote no on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Stubbe of Florida, I inform the House that Mr. Stubbe will vote yes on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Walorski and Ms. Sparts, both of Indiana, I inform the House that Ms. Walorski and Ms. Sparts will both vote yes on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bob Good of Virginia, I inform the House that Mr. Good will vote yes on the motion to recommit.
Or for what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Gates of Florida and by Ms. Boebert of Colorado, I inform the House that Mr. Gates and Ms. Boebert will vote aye on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Donalds of Florida, I inform the House Mr. Donalds will vote aye on the motion to recommit.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Boyle, Mr. Ruppersberger, Ms. Trahan, Mr. McKetchin, Ms. Newman, and Mr. Jones, I inform the House these members will vote no on the motion to recommit.
Is Jordan up? For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Ms. Hartzler from Missouri, I inform the House Ms. Hartzler will vote yea on the motion to recommit.
On this vote, the yeas are 207, the nays are 220. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor shall say aye. Those opposed shall say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentleman from Ohio?
Ask for the yeas and nays.
Gentleman requests yeas and nays. Yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bob Good of Virginia, I inform the House that Mr. Good will vote no on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Representative Jeffries of New York pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Representative Jeffries will vote yes on H.R. 1808, Assault Weapons Ban of 2022.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. McHenry of North Carolina, Mr. Barr of Kentucky, and Mr. Guthrie of Kentucky, I inform the House that Mr. Barr, Mr. Guthrie, and Mr. McHenry will vote nay on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congress members Cahaley, Mike Thompson, Andy Levin, Bordeaux, Vargas, Swalwell, Richie Torres, Panetta, and Keating, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 1808. Member Henry Cuellar, I inform the House that Mr. Cuellar will vote no on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Smucker of Pennsylvania, I inform the House that Mr. Smucker will vote no on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Ann Kirkpatrick, Mr. Jerry McNerney, Ms. Eddie Bernice Johnson, Ms. Pramila Jayapal, Mr. John Garamendi, Mr. Donald Payne, Mr. Peter Welch, and Mr. Albio Series, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Miller Meeks of Ohio, Stefanik of New York, Reschenthaler of Pennsylvania, Dr. Joyce of Pennsylvania, and also Comer of Kentucky, all those members will be voting no on passage.
All right. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Spear of California, Ms. Legger Fernandez of New Mexico, inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 1808. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Kinzinger of Illinois, Mr. Rice of South Carolina, Mr. Katko of New York, I inform the House that Mr. Kinzinger, Rice, and Katko will vote nay on H.R. 1808.
Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. McBath of Georgia, pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. McBath will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Stubbe of Florida, I inform the House that Mr. Stubbe will vote no on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Blunt Rochester of Delaware and Mr. Veazey of Texas, I inform the House that they will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Wenstrup of Ohio, Mr. LaHood of Illinois, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House Mr. Wenstrup, Mr. LaHood will both vote nay on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Cardenas, inform the House that Representative Cardenas will vote yay on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does Mr. Weber from Texas seek recognition?
Speaker Perlmutter, how did I miss your birthday? Happy birthday. And as the member designated by Mr. John Carter, Kay Granger, Troy Nails of Texas, Paul Goes of Arizona, I inform the House they will all vote nay on the H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Representatives Lloyd Doggett and Ilhan Omar, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Babin of Texas, I inform the House Mr. Babin will vote no on 1808.
For what purpose does my friend from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Neal of Massachusetts, I inform the House that Mr. Neal will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Tom Tiffany in Wisconsin, pursuant to House Resolution, I inform the House Mr. Tiffany will vote no on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does my colleague from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Williams, Ms. Moore, Mr. Caston, Ms. Bass, Mr. Evans, Ms. Sherfilis McCormick, Ms. Strickland, I inform the House that those members will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Desjardins of Tennessee, Mr. Lamborn of Colorado, Mr. Palazzo of Mississippi, Mr. Van Drew of New Jersey, Mr. Green of Tennessee, Mr. Guest of Mississippi, Mr. Crawford of Arkansas, and Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. I inform the House that all of the above will vote nay on H.R. 1808. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Bush, Mr. Bowman, Ms. Presley, Ms. Tlaib, and Ms. Stansbury, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
Is he from North Dakota or something? What purpose does the gentleman from North Dakota seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Taylor from Texas and Ms. Maliatakis from New York, I inform the House that they will vote no on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Porter, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
As a member designated by Ms. Steele of California, I inform the House that Ms. Steele will vote no on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Smith, Ms. C. Maloney of New York, Mr. Lawson of Florida, Mr. Christ of Florida, Ms. Rice of New York, Mr. Deutsch of Florida, I inform the House that these members will vote yea on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mrs. Miller of West Virginia, I inform the House that Mrs. Miller will vote nay on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Boyle, Mr. Ruppersberger, Mr. McEachin, Mr. Jones, Ms. Trahan, Ms. Newman, I inform the House those members will vote yea on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Representative Mike Johnson, Louisiana, I inform the House Representative Johnson will vote no on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New Hampshire rise?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Stevens, Ms. Bustos, Ms. Craig, Ms. Frankel, Ms. Dingle, Mr. Blumenauer, and Mr. Ryan, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Wilson of South Carolina, inform the House that Mr. Wilson be voting nay on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Sewell of Alabama and Ms. Schakowsky of Illinois, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Boebert of Colorado, Mr. Gates of Florida, I inform the House that these members will vehemently vote no on 1808.
Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Gibbs of Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gibbs will vote nay on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated for Stewart, Letlow, McMorris, Rogers, Owens, Conway, Herrera, Butler, Garbarino, and Curtis, I inform the House that they will vote nay on H.R. 1808.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Walorski and Ms. Sparts, both of Indiana, I inform the House that Ms. Walorski and Ms. Sparts will both vote no on H.R. 1808.
What purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member designated by Ms. Diana DeGette of Colorado, Mr. Mark DeSagne of California, Mr. Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, Mr. Tom Swazi of New York, and Mr. David Scott of Georgia, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 1808.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez will vote no on H.R. 1808.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Waltz of Florida and Mr. Jimenez of Florida, I inform the House that these members will vote no on H.R. 1808. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Donalds of Florida, I inform the House Mr. Donalds vote nay on H.R. 1808.
What purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Ms. Hartzler from Missouri, I inform the House that Ms. Hartzler will vote nay on H.R. 1808.
On this vote, the yeas are 217, the nays are 213. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Now what? What do you got? How do we do it? Pursuant to House Resolution 1254 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 5118. With the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins, kindly take the chair.
Go with that. The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union and for further consideration of H.R. 5118, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar number 326, H.R. 5118. A bill to direct the Secretary of Agriculture to prioritize the completion of the Continental Divide National Scenic Trail and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, a request for recorder vote on Amendment number 3, printed in Part C of House Report 117-432, offered by the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, has been postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 16, proceedings will now resume, and those amendments printed in Part C of House Report 117-432, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 2 by Ms. Schreier of Washington. Amendment number 3 by Ms. Velasquez of New York. Here. The chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorder vote on Amendment number 2, printed as Part C of House Report 117-4.